go from the hammer to the tongs and from the tongs to the hammer. Going hammer and tongs. You want to shape it so it's easier to shape it whenever it's hot, so you're striking while the iron's hot. In Ireland we would be straight talkers. We would call a spade a spade.
It's intuitively within us to work with raw material. Whether you work with clay, whether you work with iron, whether you work with wood, whether you work with textiles, human beings like to make things, and iron is just one of those astonishing materials to work with. Iron requires fire to work with it, and human beings are intrigued with fire. And if anyone gets the opportunity to get a fire going and put a poker in it and make it red hot and see at the end can bend, that's just the hook to get you started with us working with iron. There's a sense that when you make something in iron, it's going to be there for a long time.
Some people are cut out for the job and some people aren't. Working with metal, it's a heavy type of work where you have to put a lot of thought into it. You have to visually see the end product. My background being from farming and not being able to get a sufficient living from the farming made me go down the line of welding and fabricating. There's a great pleasure in what we do here, and with having 3 children of my own and hoping that 1 or 2 of them will come into the business and carry it on.
The north of Ireland, I suppose, if we look at the notion of people working with iron, I'm inclined to look at the whole blacksmithing tradition. The fire that the blacksmith uses is a completely different sense of fire to the fire that normal people associate. If you have a fire at home, for instance, what you're aiming to get is the maximum amount of radiant heat from it to warm the room. The blacksmith in his hearth is actually trying to minimise that. He doesn't want the fire to come out as radiant heat, he wants the fire to close in on itself, so it's an intensifying fire. Putting water around the fire in a donut fashion encourages the fire back in on itself to create almost a sphere of fire, which is considerably more intensified than it would be if the water wasn't applied to it. In the old days, blacksmiths worked in a material known as wrought iron. The terminology still survives to this day. We go back to the turn of the century, and so many things that we see all around us today, if we care to look, were made of wrought iron. The blacksmith essentially was manufacturing for the agricultural side of life, for the domestic side of life, for the architectural side of our existence. Probably the most significant and most obvious example of his work would be a farm gate. Maybe a sense of rebellion creeps in with the constant use of the same specification of iron. You're working with 1.5 by 3/4 inch bar iron day in, day out, making the same things. And you may want to introduce little elements of your own signature to the things that you make, so that in the future someone might look at stuff you made and went, oh, that's something that Tommy made in the forge down in such and such a townland. They're lovely little touches. They're just little decorative ends to pieces of work. It'd just be his signature.
If you wanted a spade made or any tool at all, you went to the blacksmith and he tailor-made the spade to suit you. In Ireland there are roughly 171 different types of spade. The reason for that was because of the soil type. Sligo, for instance, is very stony ground, and you would need something that would resemble a crowbar. It would be narrow and very thick and very strong. Fermanagh is very wet ground, so you need something that would resemble a spoon, if you like. It has a big lift and a big dish to hold the watery, guttery soil that they have up in Fermanagh. Lovely soil in County Antrim, so you have a long spade and fairly broad because it's nice talcum powder type soil in County Antrim. They would make a spade for a certain job. It wasn't a problem. If you wanted to dig a trench in a very narrow trench, they would have made a very narrow, long spade. 200 years ago, the local blacksmith would have been making spades. Then came Industrial Revolution and big demand for spades. The spade mills came into their own because they made spades and shovels only.
In the late 50s or 60s, whenever there was no tractors, my grandfather, great-grandfather and my dad was all working together in the forge, in the workshop, shoeing horses, repairing ploughs, making gates and maybe cart wheels. There's 4 generations of blacksmiths. As someone says, it's in the blood. To shoe horses is in the blood. The blacksmithing had sort of died away here for a few years, and then I started up again with the tools which was left for me to do work with. The old forges and workshops, was many of them all around every village, and now they'd be lucky if there's one forge in the whole of the county now, rather than having 3 and 4 in every village.
Our local blacksmith was a very important part of the community, particularly the farming community. If you wanted a gate, you got it made. It would have been made to measure wherever the space that you wanted to fill. Oh well, things was made to last, and that was why there was so much maintenance work and repair work to be done, because it was worth the repairing. Take for instance the gate here. It'd be hard to put an age on that, but it could be any age, up to 100 years old. The very rivet that the blacksmith would have made and put in there is holding that as firm today as it was the day it was put in. You know, the material was in it then.